Hey, Wrecker.
Hey Nick, how you doing?
Good. Listen, I want to discuss something with you. We had a speaker, a very good friend of ours actually, was here last week, and he gave a talk in front of an audience. And he did a wonderful job. It was entertaining. He was provocative. It was super interesting. It was a very nice talk. And then at the end of the talk, he had one question that was an interesting question.
What the question that he posed to the audience?
No, that one of the audience members
Okay.
posed to him, and then he addressed the question, and then a second person raised their hand and said, "So what's new here? I don't see anything new. This has all been said by And then they go on and then they talk about their own industry experience and how everything they're seeing is people in industry are talking about da da da, which first of all was not accurate, but secondly, nothing we do is new to the world and some we tend to, right? So I want to talk to you today about academic presentations, how to respond to them as academics, how to deliver them as academics. So I thought we'd discuss this today. And since Youngjin was on the phone with us anyway, Youngjin, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, Youngjin.
Thank you for having me. I have some problems with my voice, so I will be quiet.
Well, for listeners, we were supposed to have a call about something else, and we just decided to do it.
Yeah, we
do a podcast
into a podcast again. And Nick, I thought you were going somewhere else. So, folks, I did not know what Nick wanted to talk about. And when you started talking about the some person raised a hand and said, "What's new here?" That reminded me of the feedback that I usually get when I talk about my work. So I told this once. I was at a Freie University Berlin, a big sociology department there, and I presented on some work that I was doing. And this eminent professor was actually Georg Schreyer, the late Georg Schreyer, I should say.
Yeah, that's a huge name. Yeah.
Huge name, really good guy, right? Anyway, so he's raised his hand and said, "Everything you said, Bruno Latour said in the 60s. Yeah. So we do get this every now and then. It's sort of like, what's new here? You're just saying the same thing in different words. And I remember when we had our episode with Ron Weber, he also expressed his concern that what he sees a lot in publication these days is beautiful rhetorics of ideas that we heard 20, 30 years ago. But that's not what you're talking about, right? You wanted to talk about how do we deliver a good presentation?
Well, on the one hand, on the other hand, we can address what you're thinking real quick, and maybe we can do a podcast on it at some future date, because I think that we do. Right. We do sometimes rehash or rename things in the past, but that doesn't mean that what we're doing is not valid. Right. So first off, it's usually not exactly what someone said in the past. Right. It's a general intuition similar to what someone said in the past. But even if it's exactly, and you're using different words in a different context, maybe the audience you're talking to has not read that earlier thing. And then it's up to people like, what was his name?
Georg
Schreyer.
Well,
he needs to remind us maybe that, hey, here's your connection, but we can't possibly read everything that's been said. I mean, there's 10,000 journal articles being produced every minute, right?
Well,
you can't expect everyone to have read everything.
Well, that's one thing. So every now and then I agree. It sounds useful to reintroduce fields that may have been forgotten. My answer back then to Georg Schreyer, who basically said, look, all of this is actor network theory. There's agents and there's agency, and some of these agents might be human and some of them might be, others, etc. Because I was talking about technologies having some sort of agencies. And my reply back then was sort of, shooting from the hip, basically, sort of just my instant response was, look, this is a level of abstraction issue. Yeah, on some level, on a very general abstract, everything is an actor network,
Yeah.
If I look at it, if I look at the world this way, everything is an actor network, or everything is a complex system,
Yeah.
So my issue is always with these really highly general abstract theories that they hold for everything, but they're also not very useful in the concrete moment. So I do think there's sometimes a need to go deeper and maybe express the same ideas, but with a lot more nuance and a lot more specificity in a particular little context. And the little context that I was talking about then was actually entrepreneurial processes, new venture creation, and how some things, let's say in funding, where you go to get money for your venture, how that is different because of technologies. Yeah. On a large level, well, these are actors and networks, and we generate a different network of actors, and that gives us agency to do stuff. Yeah, but that holds for everything.
Yeah, but Bruno Latour never started a business in his life, right? So.
Well, if I may, it's almost like there are two extreme views, right? So all the important things have been already said. Therefore, there is nothing new we can say. That's one extreme view. Or the other view is the intellectual sweatshop, right? So we just do little things as if everything is new. And, neither of them are really ideal. And then, it's almost like when you are orchestra conductor and your piece is Beethoven 5. Your job is cooking it in a way that the audience will enjoy the performance in a different way, And I think to a certain extent, I think our work is in that sense, right? It has to be contemporary. It's a performative in a way that it needs to speak to today's audience, today's issue in a way that is refreshing, right?
So there's a book record that you should read, and it was probably the best. Youngjin probably already read this because he's very erudite, right? And this was trendy like 2-3 years ago. I don't know when it was published. Oh, I guess it was published in 2013. So it's called The Cave and the Light: Plato versus Aristotle and the Struggle for the Soul of Western Civilization. It's by a guy named Arthur Herman. And it's really a beautiful book because what this guy's doing is he's saying that any thinking since Plato and Aristotle is either just saying what Plato said again or saying what Aristotle said again. Now, of course, dotting some I's and crossing some T's, but it's always this argument. When you get too empirical, you go back to the, I guess, rationalistic. When you get too rational, then you go back to empirical, and then there's this back and forth. And William James argued the same. We had the pragmatism episode. He had the same kind of contrast. You look at any, and you're either an Aristotelian or a Platonic, right? And I would argue pragmatists tend to be Aristotelians. And I don't know. It's just one of those things that at a certain perspective, sure, there's nothing new because we're rehashing the same arguments. But as we do this, we're adding over time.
Bad friends, they come out on air public to a show that everyone listens to, and they say, Jan, you probably haven't read this book, whereas probably everybody else that you think of highly has read the book. So you're assuming that I haven't read the book.
Have you read the book?
No, I haven't.
and Nick, I have not either. So
okay.
So what a good friend would do, he would just quietly buy it, put it in the mail, and make sure it arrives.
I'm a shitty friend.
No,
all right.
I wanted to reply to what Youngjin said, right? So because it reminded me of a little point that Kathy Urquhart did when we had her on the show. So we talked about grounded theory, right? And this criticism that grounded theory produces all these little idiosyncratic substantive theories that are sort of just, representations of this little thing. But she said, well, what she would like to see is that we use a lot of, sort of meta grounded theory, and that she feels that our IS field has something to say about technology and humans, a very grand, a very big, a very general question. So that rounds a little bit counter what you just said, Youngjin, right? So she thinks there is a bigger question, and one that's not yet really well solved by neither the IT people or the sociologists or anyone really. Sort of like, what is the relationship between technology and humans? I mean, we sort of seem to be stuck in this structuration argument and sort of like, oh yeah, structure and agency, and it both impacts each other, and that's it. But maybe there's more to it, right? And that really struck with me since we talked with her, which was half a year ago roughly. This idea that, well, maybe we do have something more to say. Because I have always been the guy that's saying, like, hey, I'm quite happy with this substantive middle level theorizing. I think there's a place to it. And if I wanted to tackle the bigger question, I should have become a sociologist.
I think I agree. I don't think that is contrary to what I said. I think the recognition that there are certain sort of either templates or genres of work that we can associate with. And then I think there's a certain or theoretical genres, if you will, and when, we never had, well, I guess it is not never, but we, like our field really brought this technology and human, and particularly like a computational technology at the focus of our inquiry. And I think we created new issues and perspective in a way So I think that that is important. It reminds me that somebody said like all the Western movies, there are only like 7 plots, basically, right?
Yeah.
But then all the good writers and directors constantly remix these things in a certain way. And I was actually sitting down with drinking wine with my friend. He's a conductor, and I was playing like Led Zeppelin. And they said Bach did it in so, and then I did something else. And then, he could relate every single rock, heavy metal, jazz to classical sort of style. And I think it is across all areas in a way, right?
But we're going to interrupt you here, Wrecker. You know what it's like to go hang out with Youngjin? This is what he does. He sits there and drinks wines with the composers. If you go to his house, his wife, Youngjin's wife, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Youngjin, is a cellist.
Yeah, I know.
Right, and she's like next level cellist. Right, it's like you go to his house for dinner. Afterwards, you kind of retire to this room where she gives a personal cello concert to the guests there in this moving experience. It's like phenomenal. You feel, hanging out with Youngjin, you feel so sophisticated.
It's a little bit like with Brian, with the difference that Brian does so uninvited, and he just comes with his guitar.
His guitar, yeah. Hey, listen, you two are hijacking my whole thing I wanted to discuss today. All right. So we're going to get to the short. This is what I think. When someone in academia is presenting their research to you or their ideas to you, you have a choice. Am I going to be a jerk or am I going to be generous? And I always find myself, if you want to be a jerk, this is what you can say to every presentation. Okay. Every single presentation. The first thing you can say is, what's new here? And put the burden on the presenter to now scramble and tell you what's new, which is just a jerkish thing to do. Because there's, as we just said, any contribution you might have, one could argue. I mean, Led Zeppelin, you could argue that's just Bach, right? Sure. Yeah, except that it's not. So number one, what's new here is just a mean, stupid comment. It's a rookie. Number two thing you could do is, have you considered XYZ? No. And why should I consider XYZ, right? We have remember our episode on, have you considered the technology acceptance model? It's like, no, there are 1,000 different theories. There are 1,000 different things. There are 1,000 different methods. Have I considered them? No, I haven't considered every single one of your nonsense things. That's a stupid question, right? Number three, and this drives me nuts, is it's less a question, really a comment. And now I'm going to talk about myself for 10 minutes. Okay. Well, I did this study and then I did, and it's like, why are you, when someone else presented, talking about yourself? Right. So those are the three things that you see at these conferences that people should never do. On the other hand, you can be generous. Well, all right, before I get into generous, what do you think? Did I hit all of the how to be a jerk, or did I miss some ways to be a jerk when someone, I mean, if it's a clarification question and you're asking about some math or whatever, I think you can do that, right? And if it's a hard question, that's okay. But,
well, I'm going to give you a fourth knee-jerk, jerky reaction, which is this is nice, but how you should really study is do this completely different research design from now on.
Yeah.
Now, you've done this, I've done 4 surveys here, but really, you should do 7 experiments. That's not helpful at all, right? That's also one.
I will give you the real story, which I think consider as the mother of all jerky response. I heard it from one of my friends who was in the room when he was a doctoral student, very famous scholar in our field at one of the top schools, listening throughout the entire PhD or job talk. And at the end of the talk, raised his hand, said, I have one question. I wonder why not only you wasted my time, but wasted your time over the last 5 years doing this work. And then he walked out. I mean, it's a true story. So,
wow.
You can get any worse than that, right?
So I went to, and I'm not going to name the university, but I went to a very prestigious university and gave a talk. And there were these old guys from like operations research or something. And it was my dissertation. So this is many years ago. And it's on ERP, right? So I talked at NASA, right? And I talked about ERP, and I said ERP this, ERP that. At the end of the presentation, and I realized I never defined it, but I thought that these people, they're in business schools, they would know what an ERP is, but they're these old guys that apparently didn't. His criticism of me was basically that, saying, well, I'm not sure, what these ESPs have to do with anything with an organization, but And it's like, not only did he should have asked a clarification question, like, wait, I'm sorry, what's ERP? If I don't know what ERP, instead, he's insulting me using the wrong acronym and then putting it down and putting the burden on me to now defend myself and whatever. And what was really nice is my host at this university stepped in and said, well, wait, because I was old, but I was a fairly newly minted, I had a job at that point, but my host stepped in and said, well, wait a second, first of all, it's enterprise, and anybody in an organization knows what enterprise resource planning is. So totally kibosh the old dude, but there are jerks out there, and I think it's malevolent. I think you see a lot of it, and it's like, I need to speak, but I'm not going to actually engage with this person. I'm going to flex and show how important I am, right?
I want to do two counterpoints. Yeah, I agree with everything. Just two counterpoints to see that there's sometimes even value in jerk reaction. So the first one is a story when I started in Australia, we did a lot of, what you Americans would call engaged scholarship, right? So we worked directly with, especially SAP. They had a big research center there, and they gave a lot of money from which your funding came and stuff like this. And every now and then you had to present to the senior VPs of SAP research globally. Now, these people, they don't really care about your little PhD student work that is, some $30,000 grant somewhere. They have thousands of them. Yeah. So they would, at that time, they were all Europeans. Most of them were Germans, actually. They would give you 3 minutes until they start walking out of the room. Yeah. And everyone was afraid of them.
So you got to get to the point.
You got to get to the point, because there were so many stories, and I've been in some of them where, you start blabbering on and, you have this agenda slide and you talk about the background and blah. And by that time, the person walks out of the room. Like, he doesn't care. He literally doesn't care about this.
You're boring the crap out of them.
The second one was with Woolworth, and now, again, very big company. They don't really care about that. They give you a few $1 million. That's in their fact sheet, doesn't matter in their balance sheet, right? So again, time is
that's
really
why
precious.
they went out of business.
No, they're not.
That's why there's no Woolworth.
They're all doing really well. So, again, CEO, director level attention is really scarce. So you better get to the point, and not even to the point. You better have an outcome that you want to achieve. And if you can't even communicate the outcome of why we're even having this presentation in the first place, they again walk out of the room. Because then 40 minutes of not doing this meeting is more valuable than listening to your 40 slides. So there's something to this, and to this sort of jerkiness that makes you focus and making sure that you deliver a message in a particular way. The second point.
So wait, hold on. Before you get to your second point, let's just talk about that. That has to do with the delivery of the presentation. So you're moving the locus from the person engaging in someone else presenting, which is what I'm talking about, and you're moving it to the role of the presenter. And I think we should talk about that, because academic presentations suck. And exactly what you just said is why they suck, because it's all about me and what I did and all this, instead of, okay, so yes, we'll get to that point as well. But all right, what's your second? When's jerky positive?
The second point is a little bit how I sometimes feel even when I review papers. There are also bad papers and bad presentations. And every now and then, the only meaningful comment you can make is, I'm sorry, buddy, but this doesn't work. You're asking this question, and how you're trying to answer is not allowing you to answer the question. So the only comment I can give you is go back, scrap that survey or whatever it is that you did, and do something else instead. That's the only thing I could possibly
say. So I would argue you don't do that in the room. And I'm, it isn't Youngjin or me up there in front of you who can handle whatever you're going to throw at us. Most of the time, the person presenting is, even if they're a bit accomplished, they'll be insecure. You're a senior editor at a top journal. You're well known around the world. If you say something like that in a public forum to someone, you're being a jerk. If anyone says that, you're being a jerk. Now, if you go to them afterwards on a one-on-one conversation and say, listen, my best advice to you would be scrap it and do this. I don't think you do it in a public forum. I don't think that's necessary. I think if it's a job candidate and you're hiring them and you want to see how they handle adversity, then you can maybe be intentionally a little bit rough and see how they interact with you, I suppose. So that's one argument for being a little bit jerky. But I think in general, it's our job, not only as more senior people, but as academics. Everyone's out there. If someone's giving you a presentation, unless they're just completely sloppy, give them the benefit of the doubt that this is the best of their work, that they're actually presenting what they think and their research. And yeah, maybe they slap something together last minute or doing a bad job. But I think what we should do is assume they're doing their best and assume they're putting forth the best of their thinking, and they're pridefully presenting something. And for you as a human being to sit there and look at a fellow human being and just rip them apart like a jerk is it's inappropriate. It's petty, it's small, and it's ugly, right? So I think you do. So I'll give you two things that I do. When I actually go to a presentation, any presentation with an academic, but especially a junior presentation, what is the most horrible moment when someone presents? All right, I'm not going to give you this quiz, but at the end of the presentation, I have that slide that says questions.
No one asked a question.
And then there's silence.
Yeah.
Imagine going up 15 minutes, you just presented the best of your work, and then you say, any questions? And no one, just crickets chirping, right? That's the worst part of that. That's it. I just presented my life, And so what I do is I always come prepared with a question. So I pay attention enough to have, so that when they say any question, I actually have a question, because that's like a gift that I'm giving the presenter. Now, if someone else asks a question, fine, I don't need to ask it. But just in case it's one of those where it's questions, ? Which, by the way, you should never finish a presentation with questions. You should always finish with thank you. And then, then you never have that awkward moment. But you should drop the mic, thank you, and get off the stage. And then they'll call you back if they have questions. But if they have the question mark slide, which everybody does, you give them a question. And that's being a kind human being to another human being, right? And letting them talk and make it a sincere question. Do some digging, but don't be a jerk. And then that sometimes inspires other people to question, and do it generously, right? Say, listen, I like what you're doing here. Did you? And then get into a clarification. What did you do when you did this, right? How did you do this, right? And I think that's an important part.
I don't want to take the side of the jerk here, right? I don't want to take the side of the jerk and defend the jerkiness, but there is this argument to be made of, about the efficiency of it all. What Youngjin said this, like, okay, are you wasting your time? Are you wasting everything? Not, some research should be stopped, And so I was PhD.
But do you tell them that in the public forum, or do you take them aside afterwards and say, guys, you're not going to publish this?
I know this is not going to come across as very popular, but I was a PhD program director in Cologne and also in Australia for a while. So, as a PhD program director, you see a lot of the bad cases. Yeah, you don't see all the ones that swimmingly go through and, finish their PhD with 20 papers to the name and stuff like this. You only get the ones where there's escalation needed, right? Anyway. Most of the issues always are in the interaction with the supervisor, so that relationship doesn't work. That's usually the problem. The other problem that happens a lot is that people are not being told soon enough that whatever it is that they're doing isn't working, and that everyone lets them go through the process of the different stages in the candidature and whatever else, an interim presentation, etc., until to the very, very final stage where it's a binary yes or no, you gotta get it granted or not. And very often at that stage, what the hell are you supposed to do then? You can't grant the PhD for this piece of work, but really this should have been told to you after 6 months in, 1 year in, 2 years in, not 5 years in. What have you guys been doing for the last 4 years that no one told them that this route isn't going anywhere? And I'm angry at this, not because of the students. That's usually not their fault. It's their advisors' fault. They have been bad advisors, they've been bad supervisors. So there is this thing that every now and then he's like, Mike, whatever it is, this isn't working. Go back to the drawing board. And if you,
but you do that, so I agree with you.
Etc. Sometimes people just push through because kind and gentle feedback is sometimes not as.
Wait, you're mixing up different things. One, I'm talking about presenting in a public forum someone's research and how you as a stranger should react to it. And I think generously, beating them up is not doing anyone any favors. Now, what you're saying is sometimes people need real feedback, particularly if, and I'm not in any way saying we should just accept sloppy research and pretend that it's all wonderful. I'm simply saying in a public forum, it's usually not very constructive to call the person out and beat them up too badly, right? I think the trick is, if you're going to if there's a kid who's presenting in front of you and you're the PhD coordinator and their advisor dropped the ball, what I would do is take them aside afterwards and say, listen, I think you need to consider an alternative course of action, and here's why. You know?
So first of all, while I was talking, Youngjin was nodding his head, and while you were talking, he was not.
No, he was nodding for me.
No. Yeah, no. So I think I agree with both of you. I guess, we are mixing two things, and we need to give a like, what is it called, a radical transparent feedback when it comes to students, and then our mentee, and then like, that is gifts, and we
our students,
yes. Our students, and we should do it in a way, constructive way, helping them, but they need to hear from us the most honest assessment, because there's no one else who will give it to them, and hopefully we will actually help them to fix those problems. But like, a
Agreed.
Public forum is a different matter. I have a question, Nick, that I'd
it's
like
a public forum and someone else's students, right? That's
exactly.
when you be generous and gentle. Yeah.
So Nick, I'm going to give you a case study, and then I wonder what you would do. So this is a real example. I don't know whether you were actually a student here when this actually happened at Case long time ago, way back when, group decision support systems and, electronic meeting systems were popular. A lot of candidates came to us who studied that, right? And here's a candidate. So it's a job talk, and who began with a premise that in organizations, the important decisions are made between meetings. That was like a very first top slide at informal settings, right? And then the very next study, for some reason, he made a pivot, like, therefore I study meetings. Right? So like, so I'm missing something here, because I cannot make the connection between your first slide and the second slide. Yeah. And
so you asked the question. It's like, wait a second, didn't you just say this? And then you would say that. That's a question. That's not killing the person.
But what happened was that I think that the candidate was like utterly destroyed by that question. And I was just shocked that the advisor or the school didn't prepare him for that. And the candidate himself didn't see the contradiction, like opening slide and the rest of the study.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that's an obvious, if you have that question, like, wait, where does this flow from that? And you then by all means ask it. I'm not saying let's never ask a hard question because we don't want to embarrass. If you can't handle a question like, how does your study flow from your own motivation that you just gave us? Sure. So I'm not saying we shouldn't ask hard questions. I'm saying we shouldn't be intentional jerks, because what I would argue is that's a clarification question. It's like, wait a second, this is how you set it up, and this is the study you're doing. Can you explain to me the logic there? They just presented it. It's totally fine to ask them to explain the logic, or if you find they're contradicting themselves, say, look, earlier you said this, but now you're saying this. How do you reconcile those two? I think these are scholarly, challenging questions, but it comes from listening closely to what they're saying, and it comes from clarifying their view, asking their logic. I think that's all good. I think asking really hard questions, if you're looking at an econometric study and you think of, say, some robustness check that you didn't see and you want them to, that's fine. And then if they're like, oh, I didn't do it, and they're maybe embarrassed, well, they should write it down and for the future. But I think what happens is, after you've done that, and after they're destroyed and don't have a good question, you don't keep beating them up. So I've seen that too. I've seen people go, well, then this is not da da da. I think at that point they set themselves up. They answer your question, and if they didn't answer it satisfactorily, let it drop in the public forum. And then later, if you're hiring the person with your colleagues, sit around and go, did you see how they answered that question? It was atrocious, right? And then you don't hire the person.
Yeah, and so I think for the listeners, I think the student actually handled it. I mean, I think at first didn't know what to say, but I think they recovered pretty quickly and said, "Well, that's a good question. I should think about it, right?" And then move on.
That's a
and
good
say,
way to
let me
handle
present the rest of the paper. And then I think we just moved on. And then we had a good conversation. And then the candidate came back during the one-on-one meeting, like, I should stop that. I should stop using this slide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking. So Nick, you're a little bit about sort of like, okay, what's the right way to behave as an audience member? Sort of like, how do I phrase the question, etc. Not necessarily the content of the question, because I want to still be able to say, like, look, I am not sure your research design is, well thought out, given your problem, whatever. I still want to be able to make that comment, right? So I think that should be okay to sort of throw that up as a question, but not in a jerky way. I get that point, right?
I think that, so I believe in scholarly challenges. I believe it, it's one of those things like, what do they call it? There are two types. There's affective and cognitive conflict, right? So I think cognitive conflict is fine. We're in scholarship, and cognitive, disagreeing is okay. But when it's like douchey disagreeing, that's the problem. And I think that cognitive conflict is fine. There's a kind way to have cognitive conflict, which is you're generously assuming the other person is putting forth their best work and you're being kind. You can still disagree, but you can disagree in a kind way. And I think that kindness, to me, especially among senior people, you can really crush some of these junior people that are presenting at conferences and that sort of thing. So just make sure that and I realize Germans don't do this. Germans are very much like, these are the facts, da, 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 da. Our buddy Stefan was telling me that, in German meetings, they just show up and say, what's our German agenda? And then they go on, right? Here in the States, we sit down, we BS a little, we do, and then eventually we get to the agenda, right? So I realize that some of it is cultural, but yeah.
So because I just want to, in wrapping the story, remember I said went to sociology department at Freie University where Georg Streeck worked, etc. And he threw that question with Latour at me. But in hindsight, this is the one seminar that I gave over the last 3 years that I remember, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That was one of the best seminars I've ever had, because there was a deep intellectual, what did you call it, cognitive discussion. And I couldn't handle all the questions particularly well. Some of them I didn't, some of them didn't, but it came out and said, like, wow, I haven't had such a good seminar in years. But you know why? Because what I think is worse is sort of, I come in, I present my work, because usually I do this because I want some feedback. You present a paper,
no, totally.
Third round somewhere, and you want some feedback. And then I come back and say, I presented this to these guys here. Oh yeah, did you learn something? No.
Yeah.
They asked a bunch of meaningless questions. What's the point of that?
Yeah, so I agree. So the point is, don't be a jerk, but that doesn't mean you have to just give them softballs that are gushy and praiseworthy. No, don't do that. Actually engage, right? Engage and discuss in a respectful way, in a kind way, but go ahead and engage. Go ahead and ask the hard questions. Absolutely. We're in academia, right? People should be able to respond to difficult, cognitively, challenging questions.
So let's turn this around a little bit while we get to the end. You talked about the three things that jerky audiences do. Let's talk about the 2-3 things that the presenter should never do. And I have some example. One of them is a really German thing, which is German guys and girls. They often present, and this is my topic, and the next slide is their agenda slide. Oh, this is what I'm gonna talk about today. I'm gonna start with an introduction, and then I move to the. No, you have already started. Don't tell me you're gonna start, right? So drop the agenda slide. I hate it so much.
I agree.
And the second issue is this: they spend way too much time on the front, on the background and the method. I don't care. I want to learn about the case. I want to learn about the findings, and I want to know more about the implications. Have you ever noticed that the implications, they get about 1 minute after some guy already, held up the sign saying, like, you're 5 minutes overdue. And then they go, oh yeah, and here are my conclusions and implications, and poof. Yeah. But they spent 30 minutes on their measurements or whatever. Yeah. So I think that is the attention in the different sections. They're copying that from the paper, but it's not a good way of presenting a work.
Yep. Agreed. So there are two things that you brought up that the first is they're not user friendly. The academics are the worst presenters. If you want to go see the worst presentations, just go to an IS conference. 9 out of every 10 presentations will outright suck. Okay. The people will go up, they will bore the crap out of you with a long lit review. Then they will bore the crap out of you with what they did. It's about them. And then, usually they're out of time and they have to hurry up and get to what you want to do is entertain and motivate. You don't want to give at a conference your entire paper. What you want to do is motivate people to buy your idea. You're making an argument and you're showing evidence for that argument, and they can go look at the paper if they want to understand your method, or they can ask you questions. You need to motivate it in a fun way, not make a boring lit review your motivation. Then you need to, give a quick slide showing I did this at rigorous method, right? But then get to the coolness of your findings and get to the so what, like you said, and do it in an entertaining way with a narrative. People don't know how to do that. And it's awful. It's because their advisors suck, and then they teach their students to suck, and then their students suck. And then we have everyone doing these agendas and these horrible presentations. That's the one thing. The other thing is we don't have the maturity to edit what we're saying. These people, and I have to say, I've gone over, because I entertain myself when I'm running my mouth, right? But I've gone over time and that sort of thing. But then when they tell me I have 5 minutes to go or 2 minutes to go, I think, oh, what's the important thing I want to say? I'll skip slides. I'll get to the important thing I want to say, and I'll finish on time, right? What you see these people do, and you know what I'm talking about, right? You'll see where this is heading. They start, 5 minutes, but I'm only on slide 2. So I just have to talk faster and still give you every single thing that I had on all my slides. It's like, no, you need to edit. You need to actually not say things in order to finish in time. Instead, they keep going over and then they'll say 1 more minute. They're 5 minutes over. They give the 1 more minute sign, and then they're talking really fast as they read their slides, right?
So Nick, I'd like to add a few things here. The most useful resource that I found in preparing presentation is a book called Presentation Zen.
Okay.
It is about visualizing your idea and how, from a technical perspective as well as, the style. So I think it is important. There's a lot of things we could talk about it. The other thing is that particularly for job talk in the US market, the presentation is when we evaluate your potential as a teacher as well, right? And then what do we see? We see how engaging you are, and we also see how you respond to tough questions and jerky audience. Because MBA students and executives are not necessarily the most friendly audience that you will find. So you need to show how you handle these tough situations.
Absolutely.
The third one I think I would add is that, you cannot control other people, but you can control how you react. It's very stoic thing to say, but I think it is important. So, jerks out there, they will try to do what they always enjoy doing. But I think it is important for you how to respond. So this is my best recollection of the best response to a very deliberate, it wasn't even jerky, it was a very evil, deliberate attack on a candidate at a job talk, right? So someone presented a very brilliant presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, someone raised his hand, and the person really didn't want to hire the candidate. So decided that that he would ask the most unfair question, like attacking the fundamental presumption of the study, the approach. And I was like, okay, so, we were all looking at the candidate to see how she would handle it. And you know what she did? She started, so she took a while. It took a while for her to react. And then she started laughing. Literally laughing at that person by asking that childish question. And then she said, oh, so, and she just couldn't contain herself or just kept laughing. And then, oh, you asked that question. All right, I suppose you can ask that question. And that was it. And
that is awesome.
It was just brilliant, right? And then the senior faculty made fool of himself by asking that really unfair question. And no one wanted to follow up, what was your answer to that question? Because it was so obvious, right? And then she just exposed that. And so there are ways I think you could handle those kind of situations.
Well, but what I think, you said was it was natural. And I think people always respond to authenticity, right? And she smiled, and she was a human being, and I think as a presenter, you have to remember that you have an audience of human beings, some of which are petty and jerks, and that natural responses work. And having a reflection saying, well, so what you're doing is questioning my entire dissertation approach, and that's authentic. But one thing that's interesting is that you're bringing up a job talk versus a conference presentation. Conference presentations, I think, have to be tight. And they have to, this is the useful part of my conference, show some of the rigor, some of the data, but really it's about what I found, what my point is, setting up that point and being entertaining, I think. Job talk is a little different because you have much more time. And I've seen so many people die on their job talks. They don't get the job because of the job talk. They're a really nice person. They have the nice dinner. They do it, but they totally undermine because they don't come off as good teachers. They don't manage their time. They don't address questions, whatever. It shows a lot of judgment because you're on the stage. So job talks, you have to be thorough with the method and the rigor. You have to be a very good presenter. And really, I would say what you just said is, and fielding questions is possibly the place in a job talk where people shoot themselves in the foot the most, right? They get defensive. I think that's one thing that they do is that, there's maybe it's a perfectly reasonable question or a clarification question, and they get very defensive, right? Defensiveness will kill it. Not being prepared, like not knowing the foundations of what you're presenting. Let's say I was institutional theory. If I didn't read the early stuff in institutionalism, I did qualitative research. If I didn't understand the foundations of grounded theory, and I was doing grounded theory, and if I didn't do those two things and did a job talk, they would bust me on it, and I wouldn't get the job, right? So, right. What else? How else do people shoot themselves in the foot on a job talk?
I think I would add that you're selling two different things. At conference, you're selling your idea. At job talk, you're selling yourself.
Yeah.
And so you start from there, and then you package your entire presentation accordingly. And the other one is that I remember when I was giving a talk, job talk at Case. Dick Boland was in the audience back in the day, right? And I use structuration theory as the theoretical basis of my work. So I gave a presentation. Dick didn't ask much questions, but then he, there was a reason, right? He was doing something else, and then other people
sleeping.
He was nodding, and
no,
and then, but then he walked up and he summarized what I was doing in a way that that I would never be able to do. Right? He has this brilliant way of uplifting other people's work and repackaging in a way that is very, very elegant. But then, he took me out for dinner, and then he was driving me to the airport. And in that 30 minutes, he gave me a lecture of structuration theory, how he would read Giddens, and which allowed me to reread entire collection of Giddens in a completely different way. And then, the reason I bring this up is because he could have destroyed me. Yeah. He could totally oh my God, I completely missed some of his points, right? Oh my God, what if he asked me this question? I would not been able to answer any of these comments. And then he didn't criticize my work. He just simply said, this is how I read Giddens. Yeah. And that was such a generous, meaningful 30-minute, my time with Dick Boland, intense conversation about ideas. And I think that's what we need, right?
Yeah. So I just wanted to, in wrapping up, perhaps, the two difference between the job talk presentation, the conference presentation, how I think about it, is sort of we're selling stuff in both of them, but we're selling different things. In the job talk, I'm selling myself. How do I do this, right? I always equate it to like, I want to show who I am, what I stand for, the values, the philosophies, and maybe the character. And the character is not, I'm brilliant at everything, but I'm doing this, but not this. And I stand for this, but I don't stand for this. So it's a lot about me in a way, right? So maybe you want to present yourself as a qualitative guy. Maybe you want to present yourself as a theory development, not testing guy. Anything like this, anything that allows me to put you in a box, so to speak.
Yeah,
that's probably helpful,
well,
right?
Real quick, people say that. They say people will put you in a box.
And you should help them.
So give them the box they're going to put you in, because if you don't give them the box, who knows what they'll do. So you should be at least in control of the box that they put
the way that I've done it in my job talk is really, I have a slide about basically some values and philosophies and views that I work by, right? So sort of my philosophies, like one slide, 3 points. In my case, it would be sort of different methodologies, but very practice or something like this. Anyway, So with a conference presentation, I always think about, I want to make people read my paper.
Yeah.
Like, I don't work off the assumption that they have read it, because they haven't. And I don't want to summarize the paper because that's boring as hell. What I want you to get interested in later looking up that paper and studying it, and ideally, working with it, citing it and doing stuff with it. So what does it mean? It means I want to get to the implications really quickly, because that's the only reason why you would want to study this, because if it triggers some thought in your own head, right? Yeah. So I can't sell you my paper if I'm telling you how very elaborate I followed my coding strategy and stuff like that. And I certainly don't sell my paper by showing you that I have a very delicate background section in that paper. Yeah. So that's how I do it. So it sort of worked backwards and saying, like, what's the key implication that I want to get across, and how do I what would make people read my paper after they go to the session, or while they listen to me, that they literally go to the ISIL webpage and download the PDF and start scrolling through it.
Yep, agreed. And if you come in a little under time in your conference presentation, nobody complains.
Yeah, true.
If you have 15 minutes and you do your presentation in 10 minutes, you do not get one complaint, right? And that's just it. I like the way you say that. And the methods are fine. You want to show you're rigorous, but get past it, right? They want to see your motivation, not the entire lit review, but they want to see the motivation, right? Why is what you're doing cool? And then they want to see your conclusions, your findings, your conclusions, your implication. All right, what does this mean to the world? What did you act? That's what the presentation's about. And if you can do it in under 10 minutes, that's fine. Give up your other 5 minutes for people to have coffee or talk to you or something, right?
Exactly.
So Youngjin, man, thanks for coming on. It was fun, impromptu having you. This was cool.
And folks, we should also say, before we started recording, Youngjin pointed out that in our very famous pragmatism episode, it was crystal clear to everyone that listened that we had that we didn't know what we were talking about, and that we were clearly came in underprepared. And I'm fine with this, because I didn't read all the peer stuff. But Nick, that was a clear affront. That was a jerky answer.
I have to say, we're here talking. This is an ongoing conversation. So if people want to correct us, that's fine. And then what we should do is maybe in a future podcast.
No. We're never going back to pragmatism. We've had our pragmatism and stuff.
There's one point. So, Taufik Alashor, my former postdoc, he's at Copenhagen Business School. Phenomenal dude. He sent me a WhatsApp of myself ranting to you. Like a little recording of me, and out of context, it sounds pretty bad. I'm like banging my fist on the table saying something like this interpretive positivistic nonsense. I'm here to tell you right now, it's nonsense, right? So I throw this little fit, and I'm like, all right, I guess I do these things in podcasts. So he sends it to me. So I think people have fun with it as long as they don't take it too seriously, right? I don't know.
I hope so. Youngjin, was great having you. Thanks for coming on so spontaneously. And people, we promise we do have a few topics where we actually are preparing, and which is why we are not recording them yet, because we still have stuff to read. So watch out in the future for some well-researched conversation.
Sure, it'll happen.
It'll happen eventually.
All right, guys. See you.
Bye.